Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. We'll give some folks a chance in the next minute or two to sign in, and we will get started. Okay, Scout, I think we can go and get started now.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Brian and I are here to talk about the Earned Sick Time Act, as this upcoming effective date is quickly approaching of October 1st. We're just short of 2 weeks here from that taking place. So we wanted to host today's webinar to talk about the Earned Sick Time Act and how you all can prepare for a smooth implementation within your business for those of you who will be required to comply here up on October 1st. My name is Scout Sparks, and I'm the Director of Human Resources at the Small Business Association of Michigan. And as I mentioned, Brian and I will be hosting today's webinar. So thanks again for joining. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We should have time at the end of this webinar today to answer any questions that may not be answered throughout the webinar. But if you do have questions that you'd like to ask while we're walking through the presentation here, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as we go here. So we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, the first slide I think is mine, and I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go over to step by step the requirements of the Earned Sick Time Act. We're kind of emphasizing this on the companies with 1 to 10 employees who have a deadline coming up. But if you're a business that is larger than that, you're supposed to already be compliant with it, but there's no time like the present if you're behind on that. So we're gonna cover it top to bottom here today. So the timeline. The Earned Sick Time Act itself, in its current form, went into effect on February 21st of this year. And the businesses with 11 or more employees, and we're going to talk about how you count to 11 or how you count who's in and who's out in terms of employee counts. But those businesses were really subject to this law from the day it passed. And there hasn't been at least not enough for us to really see it or notice that a lot of enforcement work that has happened with the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, who would be charged with enforcing this law. But I think that as more and more months go by, the expectation will be that people understand what's in the law, what they're supposed to do, and that there will be compliance. So if you're over 11 employees and you haven't complied yet, they're not knocking on, they don't appear to be knocking on people's doors yet, but I would treat this as an urgent matter to get, as enough months have passed by that I think the idea of, oh, I didn't know about it or I haven't gotten around to it, will wear thin. But for those smaller businesses, 1 to 10 employees, the date was pushed off until October 1st, and here we are. October 1st is coming up real soon. So 10 or fewer employees, you're kind of in the red zone here, and you really do need to get prepared and ready to launch the mandated benefit in the form required by the law, which we're going to go over today, by October 1st. There's one exception to this, which in terms of businesses, like a business is exempt during the first 3 years after the hire of the first employee. So it's not 3 years from the incorporation of the business or the founding of the business, but from the date at which you hire your first employee. And it only takes one employee. If you have one employee, you're covered under this law. And so if you're, let's say you hired your first employee on, on January 1st of 2024. Okay, so in that case, if that's when you hired your first employee, then you can count 3 years from that point, and that's when you have to become compliant with this law. So that's one exception. But if you're 3 years from the hiring of your first employee, again, not the incorporation of the business, for hire the first employee, then you are subject to this law either on February 21st of this year for 11 or more, or on October 1st if you're 1 to 10 employees. All right, that's it. Let's move on. If you have other questions about that, or you weren't sure about, how to count, and are you subject to it yet, email us at sbam@sbam.org, and we'll do our best to answer your questions.
All right, so let's kind of go back to just the definition of what is the Earned Sick Time Act. And really, it's important when we think about the Earned Sick Time Act, we want to think of this as something completely different from just general PTO or general sick time, where employees can use it to cover an absence if they're not feeling well. The Earned Sick Time Act requires businesses to provide workers with the right to accrue and use sick time for purposes really beyond just themselves. So, for situations related to personal or family health needs. So that means if the employee is sick, or if they have maybe a sick child and they need to stay home for the day, that is when they would be entitled to use their earned sick time hours. But also it covers domestic violence and sexual assault situations, a child's health or disability, and then also public health emergencies. So it's something that, like I said, it extends beyond just the individual. And there's multiple purposes covered by the Earned Sick Time Act. So let's get into the steps. We've created a step-by-step process to help you prepare for implementation if you've not done so already. So what businesses need to comply? So all Michigan employers with one or more employees, including any person, firm, business, educational institutions, corporations, an LLC, and government entities, are required to comply with the Earned Sick Time Act and provide that benefit to their employees. This also includes nonprofit agencies. There was some confusion about that when, if we think back to the end of February, when the Earned Sick Time Act was amended, there was some confusion about whether or not a nonprofit agency should comply or not. We've confirmed that they do need to comply, as they are an employer. However, there are some employees who are exempt from being entitled to the Earned Sick Time Act, meaning they are not eligible for earned sick time benefits. And that would be employees of the U.S. government, unpaid trainees or unpaid interns. They would not be eligible to accrue earned sick time hours. Individuals employed in accordance with the Youth Employees Standards Act, so essentially a minor. If they're 18 and under, they would not be eligible. And what's new here, this is a new bullet point compared to previous webinars. Volunteers are typically not considered employees either. So this is in addition to the state's FAQ that we wanted to highlight here. If you do have volunteers that are supporting your business, they are typically not eligible for earned sick time. And then also publicly elected officials, members of publicly appointed boards and commissions, and similar public office holders are not considered employees for purposes of the Earned Sick Time Act. But Brian,
There's a second step now to this that I wanted to zero in on, which is an exemption that was in the law, and there wasn't a lot of definition around that. And the state's regulatory body that has charged for this law has put out one of their FAQs, or frequently asked questions, around this, and it is extremely narrow. So I'm going to cover what it is, but you probably don't qualify. for it. So the overall, this is a you can be considered exempt from this law. Or you don't have to provide the benefit to an employee if that employee is covered by these two things or fits this criteria. Number one is that it allows the individual to schedule the individual's own working hours. That does not include letting them pick from shifts. If you say pick whatever shift that you want to pick, that doesn't count. They are covered under this law. That doesn't, what they're talking about here is if a person is just doing work and if they wanted to do it in the middle of the night or they wanted to do it during the day, and do it completely on their schedule, there is no shift for them to pick. It's just them to do it whenever they feel like doing it. That's one criteria. So you have to meet that, and that there's no downside to somebody turning down the work, just saying, I don't really want to do this work. And there can't be any downside to them, which is kind of they've narrowed it so much that it doesn't really, this is not going to apply in most cases. The way it was written in the law, it looked like they could have defined it in the regulations to allow, like, if somebody has the ability to pick whatever shift they want and they can be on shifts and off shifts at their own will. And the state made it very clear in the FAQs, those employees are covered under this act. You have to provide the benefit to them. So they've narrowed it significantly. There is an example here, and that example does come from the state's FAQs. So we just wanted to have that in front of you. This has come up a lot. Hey, my employees, I give them a lot of control over when they work, and can we be exempt? And they take it kind of to the nth degree of employee control over schedule, which makes it so that most situations are not going to be covered by this exemption. All right, so we'll step into or move to step two, which is determining the head count. So when we say 1 to 10 employees are subject to this law on October 1st, and there's a certain benefit you have to provide, there's an additional requirement for those that are 11 or more. How do you count to 10 in this case? Who's in and who's out? And the answer is pretty much everybody is in. This is a true head count. It's not a full-time equivalency type of a calculation. So it's full-time employees, it's part-time employees, it's seasonal employees, it's temporary employees. Everybody is included in this head count. And it even includes temporary employees that are like from temporary agencies that aren't even on your payroll. They count in the head count. Ironically, you don't actually have to provide them the benefit. The employment agency has to provide them the benefit. But in terms of whether you're treated like a small business, a very small business of 1 to 10 employees, or treated like the everybody else category, it's so weird to have, like, small only means 1 to 10 employees. And if you have 11 or more, you're treated like a big business. It's an absurdly limited definition of small. But if you're 11 or more employees, that's all we're talking about, is whether or not you fall in one category or another here. It's not who you have to provide the benefit to, it's how do you count to 10 or how do you count to 11 or more. So it's all employees, including temporary employees. Okay. Now, if your business, let's say you might be definitely under 10, or you might be definitely over 11 or more. But what if you're like 9, 10, 11, you kind of oscillate between those? Then there is a specific criteria that you use to determine, do you fall into one category or the next? We'll talk to you in a minute about why it's important to know which category you fall in. So if think of your payroll, like you're gonna make payroll to somebody, or who's on your payroll in a particular week. Just, it's literally counting how many people are on my payroll in a given week. If you hit 10, or if you have 10 or fewer, then you're treated as a small business according to this law. If there are 20 weeks during an entire year, and they don't have to be consecutive, there are 20 weeks during an entire year when the number of people on your payroll, whether it was for 1 hour or 40 hours or more, they're just on your payroll, then for at least 20 weeks during the year, then you count as a non-small business. I have a hard time calling it big business because 11 employees is not a big business, but um, you only get the small business treatment if you're under 10 employees, and once you hit your payroll for 20 weeks or more has 11 or more, then you're not treated as small anymore. The so the other thing to keep in mind is this is enterprise-wide. This doesn't just mean employees in Michigan. Again, we're only talking about your classification. Are you considered small or not small by the law? We're going to talk separately on which employees actually get the business. And so I think that the question of, I see, actually, I'll go ahead and just kind of jump in, and I see in the comments a question that popped up. Like, what if you had a remote contractor or employee that's in a different country, like literally a different country? Um, this this law, for the purposes of head count, it counts all of your employees that are in any US state or territory. So if you've got somebody that is doing work for you literally in a different country, and remember, US territories are still the US, it's not a different country, then those don't count in your head count. Okay, so one of the things, what they're trying, essentially what they're doing here, I'll give just to give an example. If you were to think of like a big company that's headquartered someplace else, and just kind of, we do a lot of auto here. So if you were to say Tesla is in Texas and California, but surely they have a few employees in Michigan. Let's say they had 8 employees in Michigan. Well, they don't count as a small business under this law. They have to count all the employees anywhere in the US. But if you are but they don't have to count the employees that are in a different country. The and So for most of you watching this, it really is just going to be your head count. You look at your payroll in every single week. Do I have 10 or fewer, or 11 or more? As soon as you have 11 or more and 20 or more weeks during a year, even if they're not consecutive, for the rest of that year and for the next year, you don't get the small business treatment. Again, happy to take additional questions. We're going to do questions at the end of this as well. So Scout, take it away.
All right, so step 3, we have the leave structure. You have a couple of different options here by which the Earned Sick Time Act can be implemented. Starting with the accrual method, you can accrue the benefit at 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. And so that would mean 40 hours for small employers or 72 hours for larger businesses. Another option is to provide a front-loaded amount available for immediate use. And we'll talk about in the next slide kind of the pros and cons between accruing and front-loading. And then also you can combine either the accrued or front-loaded benefits with another company offered paid time off benefit. So essentially you could combine your general PTO policy with either an accrued or front-loaded leave model to comply with the Earned Sick Time Act while also combining it with other paid time off policies. And we can talk a little bit more about what that could look like here in just a moment. And then also employers can use both methods for different employee classifications. So for example, you could have a front-loaded Earned Sick Time Act policy for your full-time staff, but then if you have part-time staff who, maybe they don't work a ton of hours per month, you could implement a different policy for your part-timers where maybe they would just accrue their earned sick time benefits versus front-loading. You can do this, you can offer different policies for different employee classifications as long as everyone in that group is similarly situated or similarly classified. You would not want to offer a front-loaded policy to all of your full-time staff and then maybe only 2 of your 10 part-time staff. You would want to be consistent according to their classification.
All right, the next step is just going through some of the pros and cons of whether you do an accrued benefit or a front-loaded benefit. Do you give all the days up front, or do you want to have them just earn it as they do the hours? The amount at the end of the year that you have to provide in a given year is the same either way, but one, they kind of build it up over time, the other give it all right up front. So on the accrual-based method, so if you do have an accrual-based method, you do have to provide tracking hour, or you have to track the hours that are worked. So you have to know how many hours that they worked, to know how much they've earned if you're accruing. Um, if it's a person who is under the Fair Labor Standards Act and the overtime rules, if they're an exempt employee, you can just assume their work week is 40 hours. You don't have to actually track them. You can just assume it's 40 and just set it and forget it, and just it accrues and just assumes that's what they work. But if they are a non-exempt employee under the Fair Labor Standards Act, in other words, an employee that's entitled to overtime, this is a good way of thinking of it, then for those employees, if they're on the accrual method, you must track actual hours worked. You must track actual hours worked, even if they're salaried. And so that's for the accrual. Um, if you choose the accrual method, then you can establish a waiting period before somebody can utilize the benefit. You can say to the employees, yep, you're accruing the benefit and you accrue it from day one when you start working, but you can't actually draw on or utilize the benefit for 120 days from the start of employment. That's calendar days, not working days, but still, you can have that 4-month period where you say you cannot use the benefit until you pass like a probationary period. Now, in the front loading method, so if you give them all the days that they're entitled to right up front, you say, I'm just going to give you the whole 72 or more hours right up front. Or if you're a smaller company, it's 40 hours as you can cap it at 1 to 10 employees. Then you don't have to keep track of hours at all. So if you front load the benefit and it's available to them immediately, you do not have to track hours worked, at least not for full-time employees. For part-time employees, you do have to keep track enough to be able to true it up at the end of the year. Did you front load enough based on how much they actually worked? And then but here's the kicker. If you choose the front loading method, you can't have that 120-day waiting period. You have to make it available to the employee on day one. So you front load it and it's all available to them. So these are the main pros and cons between picking these two. One, you have to track hours more often, but you can put a waiting period in. The other one, you don't have to do as much tracking, but you can't have a waiting period.
So with step 5A, we talk about a decision point that you'll want to think about related to the carryover provision in your policy. So when we think about carryover, we're thinking about at the end of your benefit year, what happens to that earned sick, those balances for each of your employees. Now, if you were to move forward with or implement the accrual-based method, any unused accrued earned sick time benefits must be carried over into the new year, or the other option would be to pay it out at the end of that benefit year. It would be capped up to either 40 or 72 hours, depending on the size of your business and how many employees you have. But that's something to think about. If you don't want to have to deal with a carryover, then perhaps the accrual-based method wouldn't make sense for your policy. The other option would be the front-loading method. And with that, any unused front-loaded earned sick time hours would not be required to be carried over into the new year. So something to think about if you have not yet chosen what type of policy to implement, keep that in mind, what that carryover process will look like and what works best for your business.
The second part to this carryover decision is thinking about like separation of employment, like what do you need to do when the person no longer works for you? And there is no requirement under this law that you pay them out for unused sick time when they leave your employment. Now you can, and if your handbook says that you do, under a different Michigan law, you must. But if your handbook doesn't say it, I mean, you get to choose. Just make sure your handbook matches up with what you want to do here. You do not have to pay out unused sick time. Employees, but here's the thing is if you do have somebody who leaves your employ and then they come back, now are they a new employee or are they considered a continuing employee? And they do put a shot clock on that. If somebody leaves your employment and they come back within 2 months, then you must maintain whatever they had accrued before and they pick up right where they left off. If they leave your employment and they come back and it has been greater than 2 months, then they're treated like a brand new employee. So you can, if you do the accrual method, you can put a 120-day waiting period. You don't have to give them credit for anything that they didn't use before. They start fresh and brand new. I think it's worth mentioning here, we got this third bullet point, seasonal workers who return within 2 months of leaving, they maintain the accrued balance. So this is something like if you do have seasonal employees are absolutely entitled to this benefit. However, because you can put a 120-day waiting period, if your seasonal employees are with you for less than 120 days, they never actually reach a point where they can use the benefit. So they're technically entitled to the benefit. They can accrue the benefit, but if they leave your employment within 120 days and don't come back within 2 months, then they never actually become entitled to use the benefit. So at that point, it becomes a bookkeeping exercise, but not something that actually results in a benefit being extended. So it's kind of a confusing intricacy in this law. There is no exemption for seasonal employees, but the 120-day waiting period creates a de facto exemption for seasonal employees that are with you for less than 120 days. All right, the policy decision here, when the law was modified in February, it did give more options than it originally had. And so there's lots of different combinations, and our templates that we'll cover at the end of this that you're welcome to use have all of these different options built into it. So we're going to talk in terms of combined and or separate leave policies. We're going to talk about front-loaded and accrued. When we say combined, what we're talking about is you can under this law combine vacation and sick leave into the same pool. So let's say you offer 2 weeks, 80 hours of vacation time right now. You can count that toward the Earned Sick Time Act as long as you allow it to be used under the same terms and conditions. So you can combine it. You can say, I'm going to have one leave bank. It's for vacation. It's for personal time. It's for sick time. It's all those things in the one leave bank. The employee decides that they don't want to use it for sick time, they can use it for vacation. And so combined and front loaded. So that's the first template or the first option. All in one vacation leave bank, and you're going to give all the time right up front. You're not going to accrue anything. You're just going to give them the full amount. As long as you give 40 or 72 hours right up front, whether you're 1 to 10 employees or over or 11 or more, then you're compliant with it. You have that option. You can do a front-loaded benefit where you say, I'm going to give you all your time up front, but I'm going to keep the Earned Sick Time Act totally separate. I'm going to have a different leave bank. I'm going to have my vacation over here, vacation time over here, and I'm going to have your sick time or your Earned Sick Time Act entitlement in a totally different leave bank. You can definitely keep them separate. It's more bookkeeping that way, but the law gives you that flexibility. You can do accrual based and keep them separate, or you can do accrual based and combine them together. So you have all of these different options, and the templates that we'll share with you have those built into it. You can just kind of pick a plug and play. Yep, I want to do front loaded and I want to do combined, or I want to keep it on accrual based and I want to keep these things totally separate, vacation and sick time. There's all these different ways that you can do it. And I want to underscore, Scout covered this, but I want to underscore that you can mix and match the way that you implement this within your company. You just need to make sure that similarly situated employees are treated the same. So you can say, look, I'm going to do front loaded for all the salaried employees that are full time. And you can say, I'm going to do accrued basis for hourly and part time. Like you can do that. You just want to make sure that everybody that's like in the same classification is treated the same. And so you might utilize multiple ways here. You could say in the first year of employment, you have to give accrual basis with a 120-day waiting period. But anybody who's here in your employment for more than a year, you switch over to front loaded and no longer accrual base. You can do that as well. There's lots of different ways that you can implement this. That was one of the benefits of the changes in February, is that at least you have the flexibility to choose the method under which you offer it.
All right, with step 7, we're going to get into absence notification and job abandonment language. We'll talk about the Earned Sick Time Act toolkit that we've developed here at the end of this presentation. But before I get into this slide, I wanted to mention that we have a template designed specifically for this topic of absence notification and job abandonment to kind of help get you started when it comes to establishing a policy on this topic. But under the Earned Sick Time Act, employers do have the ability to establish their own set of notification procedures when it comes to absences or tardies. You do have the ability to do that, and we highly recommend that you do so. In the event, perhaps, you have an employee who might be taking advantage of their Earned Sick Time Act benefits. You have the ability to put some guardrails in place, and we really recommend that. So with that, employers may require employees to report absences as soon as the employee is aware of the need to use earned sick time. So with that, if it's a foreseeable absence, you have the ability to put a timeline on that. Meaning if an employee is aware that they have a dentist appointment in 2 weeks, you can require that they notify you of their intent to use earned sick time leave to cover that dentist appointment no more than 7 days in advance of that appointment. And that would be for foreseeable absences. Now, it says it's as soon as the employee is aware of the need to use earned sick time. So technically, if an employee wakes up, wake up at 6 a.m. to make it to work at 8 a.m., they're not feeling well, they can't make it into work. Technically, you can require that they make you aware of their absence or tardy as soon as they are aware, which would be as soon as they wake up to get ready for work, generally. So you have the ability to put some guardrails in place. The Earned Sick Time Act also allows employers to enforce a no-call, no-show policy. I'm sure a lot of you have maybe a job abandonment policy in place. So you'll want to make some necessary tweaks to that to reflect the requirements of the Earned Sick Time Act. And we have a template that you can look at that's pretty plug and play that you should be able to use. And then lastly here, for earned sick leave, if someone's absence is more than 3 consecutive days, you do have the ability to request reasonable documentation to support that absence. So when you do that, the employee must provide that documentation within 15 days of you requesting that documentation. So that's another thing that you can enforce as well within the policy.
All right, step 8, and as we get through, I see there's questions in, and I'll hang on with you to take as many questions as you have. But step 8 is you need to make an update to your employee handbook. Okay, so the chances that your current policy meets all the terms and conditions of this are pretty small, because there are just intricacies and requirements of the law that you wouldn't naturally just do it this way, even if you provide enough hours. This is really an entitlement. So, for example, if a person qualifies for to use sick time and they have the time accrued or available to them, you can't require a supervisor approval to use it. So if your current policy says, well, you must get approval from your supervisor, you wouldn't be able to do that under this act. It's just an example. There's lots of little changes that you probably need to make. So please do update your employee handbook. If you don't have an employee handbook, if you have employees but no employee handbook, let this be the thing that inspires you to move forward with that. It is really, really important to establish these policies and expectations in place, to have the employee to acknowledge that they have read and understand the policies, to head off issues and problems in the future. Hopefully, our templates are easy enough that you can kind of plug and play. You grab them, fill it in given the options that you have in implementing it, fill it out how you want to comply with it, and then insert it into your handbook. And if you don't have a handbook at all, we do have some resources and connections we can put you together with to get that taken care of as well.
Okay. So on the topic of tracking and record keeping, those requirements will look different depending on the type of policy that you implement, whether it's accrued or front-loaded. Under the accrual-based method, as we mentioned before, and I think Brian touched on this previously, but there are just more kind of bookkeeping administrative requirements should you go with the accrual-based method. You'll be required to track hours worked for your non-exempt hourly employees. Again, if you have exempt salary staff, it's not as much of a task there because you can generally assume that they work 40 hours per week. But with your non-exempt hourly staff, you will want to track their hours worked, as well as track their accruals, whether that's, weekly or per pay period. That would be something that you would need to track in addition to the usage of the earned sick time hours that they're using. So really three key things that you'd be tracking under the accrual-based method. And then with the front-loading method, that's one of the advantages is that there's not as many kind of administrative burdens or tasks should you go with this method. Accruals and time tracking is not required under this approach. However, you would still want to make sure that you're tracking the usage. So anytime someone uses their earned sick time hours to cover an absence or to cover an appointment, whatever the case is, you would want to make sure that you have a system in place to track the hours used. And then again, for your part-time employees, if you do extend front-loaded benefits to your part-time employees, this is kind of a burdensome step here, but at the beginning of the benefit year, you will want to issue a letter to them, to your part-time employees with front-loaded benefits. Give them a letter showing kind of the estimation of benefits that you're granting them. And then again, at the end of that year, kind of do an audit and issue a true up if they fall short. And that's only if you do the front-loaded hours for your part-time employees that you'd have to do that. In the toolkit, we have a letter template outlining that estimation of benefits if that's something that you decide to move forward with, but just another step that you'd have to follow. And then we would want to also make sure that you incorporate into your time off request system, whether that's a manual process or a lot of payroll systems have this type of module in their platform. But make sure that you have an option where the employee can choose what type of leave they're requesting. Is it general PTO? Is it time covered by the Earned Sick Time Act, so that they can formally declare the type of leave requested. And then last of all, you'll want to determine a process for how you will record and store all of this information for 3 years. So you'll want to make sure that you're storing those accrual records and employee usage of earned sick time for at least 3 years.
Okay, 10th and final step. Then we're going to have some quick other considerations to keep in mind, and then we'll cover the toolkit and also get to the questions. Communication. There is a requirement in the law that you notify your employees of their rights under this law. Rather than try to make up something on your own, the state does have a document that you can use to both notify the employees and to post it. So you're supposed to post it at the place of employment. So wherever you have your other employment posters, this one would need to go there. It doesn't need to be fancy or in color or anything like that. You can literally, the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity has created this poster. It's an 8.5 and 11 by 11 format. You print it out and you put it on the bulletin board in the office. Now, if you have remote workers and their place of employment is their home, then we would suggest that you create some sort of share file that they have access to, and then notify them that it's in the share file. So it's there. If their place of employment is virtual, it's available virtually. The other thing you're required to do is to notify people of their rights under this at the time when you hire them. So it's not on the first day, but it's when you make a decision to extend employment and they accept it. At that point, you're supposed to notify them. Again, it can just be the same like little poster. You can just put that in with your employment offer. Let's say extend an offer to somebody, you can put that in with it, and that's your notice. But you are required to, under the law, to do those two things. It must be posted at the place of employment, and if their place of employment is virtual, the state doesn't give guidance on that. We suggest go ahead and do a share file and notify them of that. And then when you extend an offer to somebody, go ahead and include that same poster, that same information, that sheet of paper in with the offer so that you know that you notified them. If they accept the position, at that point, they've already been notified and you have complied with the minimum requirements of the law. But Scout, sometimes it makes sense to go beyond the minimum requirements.
Yes, and especially for those of you who are ramping up to go live with this policy on October 1st, we have some tips, apart from what's really required in terms of notifying your employees of this benefit that they're entitled to. Really, there's some extra things to consider doing related to communication. So when you're ready to roll this out, instead of just presenting the policy or presenting the notice to your employees, we really recommend hosting, a staff meeting of some kind where you're really kind of going through the policy in depth to really not only establish the expectations, but to open it up for questions. A lot of employees might not even know that this type of benefit exists. It's brand new to some people, and it's different. It's very it's different from your standard vacation time or PTO policies. So you really want to make sure that your team is aware of what the expectations are, how to use it, when they can use it, any system changes. So maybe there's a change to your payroll system where they go in and request time off. All of those things are really good to talk about before you go live with your policy. And then most importantly, when you do roll out these changes and update your handbook, it's always good to follow up with an acknowledgement. So you can, maybe that's paper-based or you send an electronic copy, basically saying that the employee agrees to these changes in the handbook, and then they can sign off on that. And then, of course, save it to their personnel files. So last year, we'll get into some other considerations and some other things to think about when it comes to implementing this type of policy. So when you have an employee who is transferred to another position or location within Michigan, they will still maintain accrued hours and continue accruing. Or if they're not accruing and their time was front loaded, they would carry that front loaded, whatever their balance is at that time. They would bring that with them to their new position or location. So something to think about if that applies to your business if you have multiple locations.
In terms of the benefit year, when we say that you either have to provide 72 hours or 40 hours if you're over an employee, over 11 employees, 11 or more employees, or 1 to 10 employees. So how do you define a year? You get to decide the year. It can be a calendar year. You can have the year based on the anniversary date of the employee. If you have a different fiscal year, you can use that as well. It just has to be regular and consistent 12-month periods. regular and consistent 12-month periods. Beyond that, you can consider the benefit year however you want to consider that benefit year. So just establish it in your policy, be consistent with it, and you're set.
Earned sick time hours may be used in a maximum of 1 hour increments or the smallest increment used in other forms of paid leave. So for example, if you have another policy in place for vacation and you allow that to be used in half-hour increments, you could match that to your Earned Sick Time Act policy, or you could just go with the 1 hour increment maximum. But anything greater than that, such as 4 hour increments or 8 hour increments, would not be allowed.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out on that particular one, the way that the department, this is one of the few areas where I think the department's FAQs don't match up well with the law. So if you feel like challenging the law and going to court or something like that, technically the 1 hour increments, it's not written that way in the law where you can't do 4 hour increments if that's what the others say, what the other policies say. But the department has made it clear that they consider it, you shouldn't require increments any bigger than an hour. That's their stance on this. And so that's what we're communicating to you today. Probably best to stay within those practices. The the Earned Sick Time Act, and by the way, and I certainly wouldn't, I'm not bad mouthing the department. I think this is an area where they've gotten pretty aggressive in their interpretation of it. But for the most part, their FAQs, I think, match up very well with what the law requires. The Earned Sick Time Act may run concurrently with the Family Medical Leave Act. So if you are an employer with 50 or more employees and you're subject to the Family Medical Leave Act, you can run these concurrently. Okay, so when somebody is using up their Earned Sick Time Act benefits, the clock on Family Medical Leave Act can start at the same time. You don't have to run them one after the other. They're totally independent laws, and you can start the clock at the same time. If you're not subject to the Family Medical Leave Act, of course, this doesn't matter to you. If you have 50 or more employees and you've never heard of the Family Medical Leave Act, let's talk, because you are subject to it. And so it's something that you really do need to have some policies on.
And next, you'll want to, just as a best practice with everything, to make sure that you're documenting all earned sick time, leave related occurrences, and saving those types of things to your employee personnel files. We recommend that just in the event of a dispute, you have that, you kind of have a paper trail to refer back to. So that might be usage reports. So the hours used during, different dates and times throughout the year per employee. Or that could be, requested documentation if the absence exceeded 3 days. So things like that, always a good idea to save to employee files.
And finally, independent contractors. If you have workers that you pay on a 1099 and not on a W-2, so independent contractors, then just make sure that you've got these that you have people classified appropriately. The law does not apply to independent contractors. You don't have to provide this benefit to independent contractors. However, just because you pay somebody on a 1099 doesn't mean the government doesn't consider them an employee. So they will be utilizing, the regulators will utilize what's called the economic realities test to determine whether or not you have them appropriately classified. Federal law has gone back and forth on this definition on who can be classified as an independent contractor. It was pretty straightforward, very clear rules for a while. The Biden administration made the rules very subjective, difficult to know if you're truly compliant or not, or you do have people classified correctly. Those rules have been now repealed or replaced, I should say, with rules that put back in a pretty bright line standard, but it makes sense. It's important that people know you can't just classify people as 1099s. Um, they have to meet certain criteria for that. And so it probably makes sense if you have those just to go through, review what those independent contractor rules are and ensure that you have your employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act classified correctly. My apologies too. I'm talking about independent contractors, but also exempt versus non-exempt. This bullet was meant to go down that road. So um, there are two areas where businesses oftentimes don't really know what the rules are. One is if the employee it is entitled to overtime or not. So exempt versus non-exempt. It's not as simple as saying, hey, I made them salaried, therefore they don't get overtime anymore. That is not the way that the law is written. Even if somebody's salaried, if they're non-management, then in most cases they're still entitled to overtime. That means they're non-exempt in the Fair Labor Standards Act. And then it's the same act that governs independent contractors. And so those two classifications are important. There's interplay with these laws. So this would be a good time just for some HR hygiene to go through and look, who do I have as W-2 and who do I have as 1099? And who do I have as exempt versus non-exempt? And do I have people classified correctly? There is interplay with this law. It's important that you have them classified correctly. And it's actually important that you have them classified correctly even without this, because the Fair Labor Standards Act is an act that can carry some pretty stiff penalties if done incorrectly.
All right. Now we have our toolkit. So we've created the Earn Sick Time Act toolkit, which includes the following here. As you can see, it's pretty robust. It starts with a checklist just to make sure that you've really checked all the boxes before you're ready to implement. A list of best practices, outside of what we've talked about today. We have some other things to keep in mind when it comes to implementation. We've created a headcount calculator, as we discussed earlier. It's actually, they've made it a little bit tough to figure out how many employees you have when it comes to, determining the size of your business. So we have that. A flow chart decision tree to kind of point you in the right direction, depending on the size of your business. Customizable policy templates. So we talked about, the different methods by which this policy can be implemented. So we've created customizable templates that you can use depending on what works best for you. So that might be a combined and front-loaded leave bank, front-loaded and separate leave bank, or accrual-based. And so depending on what you decide to go with, we've highlighted all of the fields within these policy templates that would have to be updated or that might require an edit or a decision point. So really it should be pretty minor edits and then it's ready to go. We've also created a no call, no show exception language for that job abandonment policy, in addition to a no call, no show exception form. If by the slight chance that that absence was due to and covered by the Earned Sick Time Act, they would fill out that form. These next two would be just added to your handbook, a list of ESTA covered purposes and non-covered purposes. These are pretty lengthy documents, but really important to have in your handbook. A weekly timesheet form, absences and tardiness notification policy, which we talked about, is really important. Helpful definitions. There's a lot of, different lingo that you might not use every day. So we decided to put some definitions there for you to refer to. And then last of all, an estimation of hours for front-loaded benefits, that letter that you would present to your part-time employees.
Okay, and so the last slide, now we're going to take questions, is depending on what level of membership you are, you could either have that whole thing free or at discounted rates. We have on here for non-members, or I would like to think of you as future members, You can just buy it outright, but it's a better deal if you join as a member. It's cheap. It's literally a cheaper way to go. Plus, there's other stuff. We do a lot of stuff. We have Ask an Expert services where you can submit questions, HR or accounting or legal questions, or the employee benefit services. We've got a lot of different professional development opportunities. There's networking. There's other forms of compliance education. We even do, if you're into politics, we've got going a gubernatorial candidate series where we do these fireside chats with people that aspire to be the next governor. And we've got the 8 top gubernatorial candidates all confirmed to participate. All of these things, so like joining as a member is a pretty good idea because it comes with all these things. But this might be the thing to inspire you to move forward because we've got this very, very comprehensive toolkit. All right, let's go ahead and take some questions. Sarah, you've been following the comments here.
I have. So I know some of these questions may have been answered throughout the presentation, but I want to go ahead and ask them just so that the people who ask them of you, Brian, so the people who ask them make sure they have clear understanding. So let's start with commissioned employees. How does this work if you have commissioned employees?
Commissioned employees are definitely covered by the Act. The FAQs that the state put out are explicit on this, and I think the law is explicit on it too. So the question of how you handle it, there's a couple different ways that you can do it. You can front load the benefit and just give the full 40 hours or 72 hours, depending on whether you have 1 to 10 employees or 11 or more. And then you don't have to track anything. You give them the max benefit that you have to, and then you're done. Now, if you want to do it on an accrual basis, or you think that the amount of hours that they actually work will not add up to that 40 or 72 hour mandate, if you accrued it, then I mean, it's awkward. It's not how this employment normally works, but you'd have to ask them to track their time and to report to you how much time they spend working. So that's on the accrual versus front loaded. If they're full-time employees and they generally receive the benefits of a full-time employee, then it might be easier just to do the front-loaded method and you just give them the full 72 hours right up front. The Now the question though is like, how do you pay them? And so the the state's FAQs in this case, they say that you don't have to include bonuses and commissions, non-regular and pay into the sick time payments. So if somebody says, I'm going to take 4 hours. Well, what rate would you use for a commissioned employee? It's the base rate of pay. This is the minimum. Okay, I'm going to give you the minimum required by the law. The base rate of pay, whatever they get no matter what. So if they get like a salary plus commission, it's just the base rate of pay, but it cannot be less than the state's minimum wage. So if somebody's a full-time, completely 100% commission, you can never give them less than the state's minimum wage as the hourly allotment. Now, that's the minimum required by the law. What the practices that we're seeing more often is that rather than going with the minimum, like a minimum wage benefit level, it would be that the employer would look back on the last few paid periods, and you should set up a policy for this if this is how you're going to do it. Say we're going to do the average rate of pay for this commissioned employee for the last 6 pay periods. And we're gonna divide that by 40 hours a week, and that's the rate of pay, and that's how we're gonna pay out sick time. That would be a more standard, it's above the minimum, but a more kind of standard way of handling that. So if you have additional questions, please chime in. But there's a minimum there, but normal practices would be to go with an average rate of pay in a situation like that.
All right. This person asks, what if you are a staffing agency and you have 10 steady employees and you get an opportunity for a short-term job for more employees? It's less than 20 weeks. So they're adding some extra employees, but the time frame is fewer than 20 weeks. Does that still put you into the large employee classification?
No, it doesn't. As long as you stay, as long as that time period when there's that many people on your payroll is fewer than 20 weeks, then you maintain your small company classification. Here's the kicker though. It's not just 20 consecutive weeks. So if that scenario happened 2 or 3 times during a year, you'd have to add up all the different times. And then if by the second or third time that that happened, when you brought on like an influx of new people, if you exceed 10 on 20 or more weeks, even if they are non-consecutive, then you fall into the bigger business category for the remainder of that year and the entirety of the next year, even if you shrink back down. So the answer is no. As long as you stay under 20 weeks, you keep the small business classification. But just remember, it's not 20 consecutive weeks, it's 20 total weeks during a year.
All right, we have a few questions that are related, and these are with respect to front loading and prorating the front load. So someone says, can we switch to front load for the next year? Another person asks, since we only have 3 months in the year, do we prorate the front load? Is the 40-hour front load prorated for this year? So can we talk a little bit about those scenarios?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the question is, yes, you can prorate both this year, because if you're doing it, say, on a calendar year, that's what you're gonna how you're gonna calculate this. Then what you do is you look how many days are left in the year divided by 365. That's your percentage. You multiply that times 40 hours or 72 hours if you're over 10 employees. That's the amount that you would front load for the remainder of this year. So you definitely can do that, and you can prorate it. By the way, prorating also is allowed if you're bringing on a new employee. So if you do everything on a calendar year, but say you hire somebody on July 1st, you're 50% of the way through the year. Well, then you would prorate, you would give them, in that case, not 40 hours for the remainder of that year, you'd give them 20 hours for the remainder of the year. So for new employees and for the October 1st, you just count out the number of days divided by 365. That's your proration. Apply it to the amount you want to, if assuming you're gonna front load. Now, the other question is, could we start out with accrual, and then January 1st of next year flip it over to front loaded? Yep, you can do that too. You just want to make sure that you're treating your similarly situated employees the same. So you could say, you know what, for this year, I don't want to guarantee anything up front. I just want to do the proration. You know that if you do the prorated benefit, that the employees can't use it for 120 days, so it's not going to interfere with most of this year's schedule. Then yeah, you can put it in place starting out with with an accrual basis, and then next year decide you're gonna have to update your handbook and your employment practice and all that kind of stuff. But the you can say we're gonna do front loaded moving forward. So yes, you have the ability to do this in a way that mixes and matches, as long as you're treating employee, you want to treat your full-time employees, or it could be based on salary or exempt versus non-exempt, similarly situated employees, the same. You've got a lot of options here.
I also, sorry, Sarah, if I
No,
could
go ahead.
add on this topic, I recently helped someone with this question on the topic of those who are required to comply on October 1st and who are front loading. This individual was also interested in prorating for the remainder of this year. And I can put this in the chat, but it's essentially 91 days. So we would do, or 25% of 2025. So we took that 40-hour annual requirement for businesses with 10 or fewer, multiplied that by 0.25, so 25%, and that equaled out to 10 hours prorated for the rest of this year. So that's certainly something that you could do if you're interested in prorating a front-loaded amount, and then of course doing the full amount on January 1 if that's your benefit year.
Thank you. This next question is along the similar lines. They say front loading amount for immediate use. Would we need to allow immediate use at day one of hire? We have a 90-day waiting period. How does that work?
Yeah, so if you are front loading, you may not have a waiting period for the use of the benefit. This is the main downside of front loading, is that you cannot do a probationary period. You can only, if you do front loading, you must, under this law, you must make it available to them on day one. So if you want to have a waiting period of 90 days, and remember, you can have, the law lets you go up to 120 days only if it's accrued. I went round and round with the state on this one because I think what they don't realize is, or what they didn't realize when this was being developed, is that most employees prefer a front-loaded benefit. But the way this law is written, it actually makes it a bigger incentive for the employer to do accrual, because it doesn't allow you to have a waiting period. A probationary period to find out if an employee is going to work out is like a normal standard thing. But unfortunately, you can only do the probationary period with the accrual method, not with front-loaded.
All right. If you're using the accrual method and you have to carry over to the next year, do you also start with 0 hours for the new year plus the carry over of accrued time?
So the way that the carryover works is you never have to carry over more than the maximum annual benefit that you're subjected to, no matter how much the employee has accrued. So let's say you're somebody with 1 to 10 employees, and so you have to provide 40 hours a week, and you're going to do the minimum. You don't want to go any higher than the minimum. Now, with your full-time employees on the accrual method, might accrue more than 40 hours, but you don't have to let them use any more than 40 hours in any given year. So let's say they accrued 80 hours and they used 40, then what carries over the next year? Well, 40 hours is the maximum that can carry over to the next, you must let them carry over 40 hours, or you, in the presentation we talked about, there's some payout allowances as well if you wanted to choose to pay out employees, but you don't have to. You can just do this carryover. Now, let's say somebody accrued 80 hours and they didn't use any of it. They have a full 80 hours. You hit the end of the year. What do you have to carry over? You never have to carry over more than the annual maximum entitlement, or 40 hours. So in that case, you're carrying over 40 hours to the next year, and they can use it straight away. There's no additional waiting period. If it's available to them, they can use it. Or if they've accrued it, they can use it. Once they're past their original 120-day waiting period, there's no new waiting period every year. So they can carry over 40 hours, they can use it on day one, and they also start accruing new time. Then you get to the end of that year. If they've got more than 40 hours unused, you can lop off anything over 40 hours and only let 40 hours carry over to the next year. So hopefully that's clear. Please ask a follow-up if you have additional questions.
All right, we have 2 questions that are similar in nature here. One is, what risks are there if a salaried employee repeatedly uses ESTA without working a full 40-hour week? And along the same vein, I've had an issue with a salaried employee not punching in or out to track the accrual process. Is this a situation where I'd have to create a policy since they've signed the ESTA acknowledgement?
Yeah, here's the thing is that if you have a person, let's say they're salaried, but they're not exempt, then you really do need to know the amount of time they're working, because you have to be, if there's a dispute and you don't have records, then you're going to lose. The employer is going to lose if the employer does not have records. And so having a policy that requires a person to report their hours worked is something that really makes sense. And we do have like timesheet templates and things that are in the toolkit for exactly this reason. So in those cases where you don't have good tracking systems set up, um, that might work for a while, but if there's a dispute, if somebody says, "Hey, I want to use my time," and and you say, "No, I don't think you really earned all that time," but you have no records to show it either way, and they challenge it to the department that regulates this, I'd say the department have made it pretty clear that employers that don't have records are going to lose challenges. So, yeah, it's going to be important to set up a policy and expectations where you ask employees to report. And now, what if they don't report true information? I mean, those are, somebody's dishonest in how they're reporting, then there's nothing in this act that prevents you from taking disciplinary action if a person is not complying with policies. But it's important that you do have a policy, you establish that a policy. And then if a person violates the policy, now you got the grounds for disciplinary action. If you don't actually set up a policy and they don't follow things that you want them to do, but you never established a policy to define what they were supposed to do, it's harder to win in those cases.
All right, this person asks, can we demand that the first 40 hours of time off be used for ESTA?
Yeah, great question. So if in this really matters when you have a combined leave bank where you say that a person is, you can use your leave bank for vacation or earned sick time act or personal days or whatever. Um, the state does make it, I think, very, very clear in their FAQs that you can say to the employee, if you choose to use this as a vacation day, then it automatically deducts from your entitlement of Earned Sick Time Act. So if somebody uses it all up for vacation, they say, "Oh, but now I've got a qualifying Earned Sick Time Act need," they've already used their time for a different purpose. As long as you make it clear in your policy, in your employment policy, that this is a combined pool, and if an employee uses it up for vacation, it is no longer available for earned sick time usage, then the employer is in the right to establish policies like that. So the it's not exactly how the question was worded, but so I may have misinterpreted it, but the idea is that you can say that all time off that an employee uses counts toward this allowance, whether it's for sick time or for vacation or whatever reason, it counts toward this allowance. I think that the state's FAQs make it very, very clear that the employer can count all PTO usage toward this allowance.
Going back to a couple of questions ago, someone says they didn't quite get an answer on what are the risks if a salary employee repeatedly uses ESTA without working a full 40-hour work week?
Well, you, the employer, will establish a policy that just indicates here the employee is going to report how much time that they have worked. You then award them based on the number of hours they've worked a certain amount of sick time, and then the employee is only entitled to use as much sick time as they have accrued that you have their time and they work and you've awarded this amount of sick time. They have no entitlement to use any more time than you have awarded them in the accrual. So let's say that an employee is they have 5 hours accrued, but they're gone for 8 hours. Well, they've lost their protection under this act. They can only what you have awarded them in the accrual. So if the employee is not actually working hours, you don't have to award them an accrual. But that's why it's important to have a policy to require them to report the number of hours that they're working. So hopefully that answers that. They're not, if they're taking more time than they've accrued, or more time than they have in their leave bank, then they are not protected by this act in terms of their absences. If they use up all their time, at that point, their absences are only allowed if you approve them. And if you choose not to approve it, then you can take whatever disciplinary action you see fit.
All right, so this person has a nonprofit and they pay two different groups. They pay youth purchasers for tobacco compliance checks. Their ages 16 to 17. So they say, are they exempt? But they do another group that does this work is between 18 and 20 years old. So would they
Yeah.
not be exempt?
No, but it's a very kind of interesting line of business. So minors can be hired to go in and test whether or not those who sell like tobacco products are really checking IDs. And so there's something in Michigan called the Youth Employment Standards Act. Okay, it's Public Act 90 here in Michigan, and that is it governs the employment of minors. So like minors have to get permission from their school to take the job, that sort of thing. So think of this as 17 and younger. And for those employees, they are exempt under you don't have to provide them this benefit. They are one of the explicit exemptions. Minor employees are not entitled to earned sick time act benefits. But if you're not a minor employee, then, so in other words, an adult, even if just barely an adult, you are entitled to this benefit. So there's nothing that says you can't provide it to younger workers if you want to, but you're not mandated under this law.
All right, here's another specific question. They have a 10 employee company. The current policy has been 2 days of sick leave. If an employee has 15 days of PTO plus the 2 sick days, so 17 days, could this include the 5 days of ESTA?
Yes, but you're going to need to make sure that your policy is explicitly, your handbook policy is explicitly written this way. So the best way to do this, I think, is going to be to combine those two banks. So you no longer have your sick time in your other PTO. You're putting these things together and you say just one leave bank and they can use it. And the first 5 days that they use counts toward the ESTA requirement. And then the rest of it's available for other types of leave. So in that case, you got to decide, do you want to make it 17 days or are you just going to make it 15 days? I mean, you have, as long as it's more than 40, if you're 10 employees or less, you've met the requirements of the law. But I don't know how you would really be able to keep them separate. Like we've got 2 sick days and 15 days over here. Technically, you could do it still, but you'd have to rewrite your other PTO to say the first 3 days of leave there plus the other sick time. It would be pretty complex. I'd recommend in that case, you just put them together. You do a combined leave bank and the first 5 days that they use, whether it's for sick time or vacation or anything, that uses up or exhausts their entitlement under ESTA. And at that point, the regular or the rest of the leave that you give them, regardless of how much it is at your discretion, the employer. You're not entitled, they're not entitled to it. It's an extra additional benefit that you're making by choice.
All right, Brian, how does this work with unions?
So with unions, there are some FAQs, which I'd encourage you to take a look at, but just kind of the overview and how this works with unions is that if you have a current union agreement in place, so you haven't come to the place where the contract has expired and being redefined, if it covers or renegotiated, if it covers earned sick time act in some way, then that union agreement takes precedent over this law, even if it's less. So if you have a union agreement in place until that agreement expires, and that union agreement addresses earned sick time or sick time, sick leave, PTO for sick time, then just you live under that contract until it ends. if you have a union agreement and it does not address earned sick time, so there is no PTO benefit for sick time in your union agreement, then you must comply with this law. Now, that's if you have a current agreement and it hasn't yet expired. Now, what happens in the future when the law expires? In the future, or when that union agreement expires and it's time to renegotiate. At that point, the Earned Sick Time Act requirements become the minimum earned sick time benefit that you must include in that contract. So you have, and it doesn't automatically take effect. If you have a current agreement, it may or may not, depending on whether or not your agreement already defines earned sick time. But once that expires and you negotiate a new one, the Earned Sick Time Act becomes the minimum that you must provide.
All right, this person wants a clarification on the calculation for accrual and asks, is it 1 hour for every 30 hours?
Yes. So when an employee works 30 hours, every time they work 30 hours, so let's say they work 40 hours, then essentially they would get 1 1/3 hours of earned sick time for that 40-hour increment. So they get an hour for the first 30 and then another 10. So they get a third of an hour for that next 10. So for a 40-hour week, you're awarding essentially an hour and 20 minutes of earned sick time.
So this is another specific question I think about that went back to when we we're estimating hours. So what if my employees are paid based on the job? For example, car repairs based on an estimate of hours to repair. I think we're going back to that calculation of payment.
Yeah, so if you're on an accrual basis, there's a big difference in this type of situation if you're front loaded or accrual. If you're front loaded, it doesn't really matter. You just give the amount that you give. You either give the 40 hours or the 72 hours up front, and then they are entitled to use it throughout the year. If you're on an accrual basis, what matters is the actual hours worked. So if you're car repair and you say, well, we're going to bill because for this for this particular work, it's normally 3 hours of labor, so we're going to bill for 3 hours of labor, but the worker actually spent 3.5 hours doing the labor, or the worker they're really fast and efficient and only took them 2 hours. You pay based on the average or the actual hours worked when it's accrual. It doesn't matter if you have a separate kind of billing system, because there are several professions where this could potentially take effect. But I think this law is very, very clear. The accrual is based on actual hours worked, regardless of what you bill for.
Can I pay out the benefit every paycheck as they earn the benefit instead of having to accrue it?
Well, I never had that question before. I don't, right off the top of my head, I'm not confident in what the answer is to that. I know that you can pay out the benefit at the end of the year, rather than carrying it over, but can you just do that at every single paycheck as just additional pay? I don't know. I mean, there's certainly nothing in the FAQs that explicitly say don't do that, but I don't think that question has been anticipated. There's nowhere it's addressed either way. So if you want to send us at sbam@sbam.org a question for us to submit to the department, and we can submit it without it being under your name. Okay, so it can just be a question from SBAM. We can take that question, submit it to the department. They've been pretty good about answering these things. And then we'll share with you how the regulators see it. And again, we'd ask the question without your name so they couldn't try to go get you after the fact. So I don't know of any prohibition, but it's just that question is not addressed either way in any of the literature that I've seen so far. But this point, I've done like 50 of these set webinars. It's the first time I've had a question that I really feel like I just don't have an answer for.
I was going to say, you got stumped this time. Hasn't happened yet. All right, can we force an employee to use ESTA for FMLA leave? I assume no. I don't believe that an employer can force them to use ESTA. Is that true?
Well, right, like, an employee does not have to, it's kind of the reason why the question, I think it's difficult for me to contemplate the scenario is that, can you force an employee to get paid while they're not working? Like, wouldn't they want that? Now, you can definitely run both clocks at the same time. So if somebody's off on Family Medical Leave Act, you do not have to pay them under the Family Medical Leave Act. Okay, so they're off without an entitlement to be paid, but you have to hold their job while they're off under the Family Medical Leave Act. So if they have accrued time, they can absolutely say, well, I'm off on Family Medical Leave Act. I want to be paid for until I exhaust my Earned Sick Time Act, give me the pay for that time. And then you would have to, because the Family Medical Leave Act is much more stringent on purpose than Earned Sick Time Act. If you're off on family medical leave, you definitely qualify for Earned Sick Time. But if the employee said, you know what, I want to take Family Medical Leave Act and I don't want to use Earned Sick Time. I don't want to be paid while I'm off. I want to have no pay when I'm off. Yeah, you can't make them take the Earned Sick Time Act payment. Now, unused time at the end of the year, you could have a policy to pay them out at the end of the year. So it's not a use, but it's a payout at that point. But yeah, so no, you can't force a person to claim unsick time or earn sick time if they don't want to claim it. But if they're taking time off for pay, you can count it toward the Earned Sick Time Act, regardless of the reason that they're off.
All right, we have time for one more question. That means we do have a few that are going to go unanswered on this webinar, but as Brian has stated, if you email us at sbam@sbam.org, we will get back to you. All right, so Brian, if an employee uses all the time in their sick bank and then takes more time, can that legally be grounds for dismissal, even if they really are sick? Can we choose to make it unpaid time? I want to make sure we can terminate employees who abuse sick time.
Once the employee exhausts their benefit, so as long as you've properly accrued and awarded the time, once they run out of time, they are not entitled to any of the protections under this law to use additional time. Even if they're sick and it otherwise would qualify for time off under the Earned Sick Time Act, but they just don't have any more time accrued, then you can take disciplinary action, which includes a lot of different things, including firing. If a person doesn't have time and they're still absent without your authorization, because remember, once they use up all the time, they can't, they're not entitled to take any more time. So yeah, you're in the driver's seat at that point. And yes, you could give them, I mean, if somebody's sick, you probably don't want them in the workplace. And you could have them, they could take unpaid time. But again, in these cases, decide how you want to handle that and establish a policy. Please establish a policy. Don't just kind of like do it on the fly. So if you want to allow people who are sick without any more leave time available, then then establish a policy. Say, well, you can at supervisor's discretion, you can have up to an additional 3 days if a person is sick, and you can add requirements. You can say sick and provide a doctor's note or something like that. Once they have run out of their time under the Earned Sick Time Act, then you can establish the policies at your discretion. All right, I see there's still additional questions coming in. We are very faithful about answering these. So we've got just 3 o'clock, another one to go to, but if you could email us and we will definitely walk through it with you. Or if you didn't ask a question, you're like, I'm kind of shy, I didn't want to type in a question, reach out to, and we're happy to walk alongside you through this process as you put this in place. Thank you all for being here. And we do have upcoming webinars as well. It's just like this one. It's the same webinar, but I know sometimes people we've got many who have been return members to our webinars to just kind of let it sink in a little more, and you pick up a few extra things based on other people's questions. So either good luck on your journey. We'll look forward to getting an email from you if you have other questions, or we'll see you next time if you want to join us again.